Good day, everyone. It is Bridget here from Bridget's Healthy Kitchen with a very exciting quarantine kitchen cooking class today, because I know that one of the things that I've been noticing a lot online recently is that people are really getting into baking, which is absolutely awesome and amazing and super exciting, because what that means is that we are getting back into the kitchen, which is where we all need to be at this point in time. So if you're on lockdown, if you're on quarantine, if you are suddenly finding yourself at home a lot, you might find these classes a little bit interesting and a little bit helpful. Please let me know where you're coming from today. Let me know where you are, and let us all know, all around the world, because we have people joining us from all around the world. Let us know how you're doing as well. What's happening in your area? So I'm back in my kitchen, which is exciting. Last couple of days I've been in the hospital with our son. He's now been released, which is fantastic. He still has a long way to go, but he can do that from home now, which is exciting for us. So thank you to everyone who's joining me for today's class. As I was saying, we're doing a bread baking recipe. Now, it's one that I have shared before. So if you would like the recipe to what we are doing today, I'm doing my Crusty Dutch oven bowl, but I'm going to break the entire ingredients list down so you understand not just why, what you're doing, but why you're doing it, because it's really important when it comes to gluten-free baking, because it is a little bit different from when you bake with normal wheat flour. So, and hi to Leslie from Tari. And yes, Mace is doing really good, my darling. Thank you for asking. And to anyone here who's joining us via YouTube, if you'd like the recipe to what we're doing today, you need to go onto my Facebook page, which is Bridget's Healthy Kitchen on Facebook, and you will find all the information you need there. Hundreds and hundreds of recipes for you to download and request over on Facebook, Bridget's Healthy Kitchen. So, hi to Mel, joining us all the way from Whanganui in Aotearoa. Thank you for joining us. Nawai, saying hi to you as well, my darling. All right, so we are going to get into a bit of a masterclass when it comes to baking, because you are all getting excited by baking, which excites me so much, because baking is super cool. Look, I was never a baker. I'm a baker now. When I was a chef many years ago, well, I'm still a chef, but when I used to work in restaurants and own restaurants, I always worked what is known as the hotline. So I did like the meats, the proteins, the fish, all that sort of stuff. And I kind of stayed away from the baking. I have come to baking. I have come to baking, and I have embraced it wholeheartedly, because what I've discovered is that I can still bake and eat really well and still maintain all these health targets that I've set for myself, and this recipe is that in a nutshell. So it's gluten-free, of course. It is also dairy-free, and it's sugar-free, which is really, really important. So without further ado, let's just get into the recipe, right? Let's just make the recipe happen, because it is very exciting. I have my oven on at the moment behind me, which is the first thing you might want to think about doing, is having your oven. And if you don't have an oven, this one doesn't quite work in the air fryer. But if you have a bread maker, you could also potentially do this in the bread maker as well. You may not get such a crusty loaf as what I get, but you will still get a pretty delicious result. And I know that many of you have done this. Hi Martina, joining us all the way from Germany. It's so good to have you. Guten Tag, or Guten Abend. I think it might be evening where you are at the moment. So hi to Martina, joining us from Germany as well. So yeah, we need to think about what we're using to cook it. I cook mine straight in my oven, but you can do it in a bread maker. You absolutely can, just so you guys know, yeah? Air fryer, potentially you won't quite maybe get such a crusty result. And if you're really wanting one of those loaves that is crusty on the outside and tender on the inside, this is what you want to do with the oven. So also, kia ora to Evelyn, joining us from South Auckland, which is where I grew up. Joining us from South Auckland, thank you. Mwah, mwah. To everyone watching us from home, South Auckland, Evelyn's joining us from Manukau, which was the fancy area. It was a bit fancy, isn't Evelyn's a bit fancy. It's our South Auckland Heights. And also to Helen, joining us from Montville in Queensland. Thank you guys. Let's get into the recipe. Come on down to my bench. let's get going. We're going to talk about the ingredients, yeah, as we're going throughout this recipe. Like I said, if you want the recipe, Mahe is going to share that link with you guys for the crusty bread bowl, so you can have that recipe as well. And hi to Anna, my Mexican sister. It's so good to see you, my darling. All right, let's go down to the bench. Okay, so the first thing that we need to, ideally, hey, look at my t-shirt first. I know it's backwards, but it says, it's not you, it's me, gluten-free, because it's not you, and I'm talking to Bread. It's not you, Bread. I actually really love you. It's me. I can't have you. So I thought it was a very appropriate t-shirt today, even if it's back to front. All right, so I've got my scales here because everything does need to be measured. Cups measurements don't really work here. We want to get a very precise measurement. So I'm starting off with a bit of a jug, just a plastic jug, and I'm going to be adding some lukewarm water. While I'm here, check out my quarantine slippers. What do you reckon? Not bad, huh? They're my fluffy quarantine slippers. You know how good it is to be able to cook in slippers? It is amazing for any chef. All right, so I've got lukewarm water here. Really important, the reason we want to have lukewarm water. You could either, boil it in the jug, you could heat it up in the microwave, or you could just let the tap run until you get it lukewarm. And lukewarm basically means it's at blood temperature. So we're looking at, if you want to be very precise, we're looking at between 36 to 40 degrees maximum on the water. It feels like a warm bath when you put your finger in. Obviously, clean hands. We all know this, clean hands. It feels like a warm bath, but you do not want it too hot. I'm just going to add a little bit more hot water. Only because it doesn't quite feel like a little bit more. And take your time. This is the idea, take your time, right? Oh, that's better. It's a lukewarm bath. It's something that you might, if anyone has had children or they wash pets regularly, you know that you want to put them into a warm, not a hot, not a cold bath, or if anyone's a hairdresser, you guys know exactly what I'm talking about here. So I've got just a jug here on my scales because what I want to do is measure out perfectly. And the best way to do this is using scales, not using cup measures. If you don't currently own scales, I suggest you go out and buy yourself some because your recipes will become even more precise and there's less opportunity for us to fail, especially when it comes to baking, because baking, remember this, it's a science. So with my lukewarm water, I'm going to pour it into here and I'm looking for 325 milliliters, which is 10.9 fluid ounces for our American friends. 325. And honestly, the easiest way to do this is straight onto the scales. So as you're going, you're measuring. All right, there you go, 325 mils of that lukewarm water. Now the reason we need lukewarm water is because we're going to put some yeast into here. And the yeast will activate and start to grow within a certain temperature range, and that temperature range is literally blood temperature or lukewarm water. So I'm going to go to my freezer, which is just behind us, and in my freezer I have some instant dried yeast. Yes, I know it's backwards. Instant dried yeast. So I'm using instant yeast, and some people have this school of thought that even though it's instant yeast, you could add this straight into the flour. Now the reason why I always start my bread recipes like this, whether I'm using instant yeast, you can also use dried yeast as well. The reason why I always start my yeast like this, I'm putting in 2 heaped tablespoons of yeast is going in there. The reason I always start it like this is just in case my yeast has died. Now one thing that we have to remember is that yeast is a living product. The reason why I keep it in the freezer is because it lasts longer. It actually goes into a hibernation stage. So rather than just keeping this in the pantry, this will die really quickly. Because remember, if you're using instant yeast, it is a living organism. So when we put something into the freezer, think about like a bear hibernating in winter. Think of this like a bear. This needs to hibernate. And it hibernates at very, very cold temperatures. Our freezer is minus 18 degrees. So this goes into hibernation. Once it gets into this environment here, which is the warm liquid, it begins to activate. It comes back to life, just like a bear waking up after a long sleep. So right now, our bear is starting to wake up. So I'm putting that back into the freezer because that lasts longer. Your yeast will last for at least 6 months if you store it in the freezer. Freezer is the way to go. The way to go. Right, back in there. But now that our bear is beginning to wake up, and he's getting a bit warm, the sun's beginning to come into his cave, we need to give him just a little bit something more to really wake him up. And the way that we do that, well, normally if you're a baker, a bread baker, the way that you would normally do that is you would add a type of sugar in here, because sugar helps the yeast to grow, and the yeast eats the sugar up. But because we don't have sugar in our diet, I'm actually going to be using fiber syrup. So I'm using about a tablespoon of fiber syrup. If you're wondering what fiber syrup is, it's a prebiotic syrup, a sugar-free sweetener. So you can purchase that online. Just Google fiber syrup, and then you can see all the places where you can buy it online. I've never ever seen it available in any stores at the moment, so you need to purchase your fiber syrup online. A little goes a long way. I only put in a tablespoon of fiber syrup. But in doing that, what I have now done is I have fed the yeast, which is really important because the yeast needs to grow, and it needs warmth, and it needs a little bit of sweetness, and we are doing it in a sugar-free form via the fiber syrup. Now, what if you don't have fiber syrup? What are you going to do? Okay, could you use sugar? Well, yes, you could, but your bread is no longer sugar-free. Could you use honey? Well, yes, you could, but your bread is no longer sugar-free. So just be aware, if you don't have fiber syrup, you want to add in, and I don't recommend this often, but I know that we are on lockdown, and for a lot of us, it's really hard to get products in. My top tip, if you can't get fiber syrup, is to go for honey. Go for honey, because it's a natural product. Go for a good quality honey, and you add a tablespoon of honey instead of the fiber syrup. If you've got fiber syrup and you want to go completely sugar-free, great for diabetics, then we go with our fiber syrup. Yeah. So this now is going to sit off to the side, and what I want to be waiting to see, and this is the really important stage, is I'm waiting to see whether that yeast is active. And the way I'm going to see whether that yeast is active is how much froth or head I start to experience on the top of my yeast. How does it grow? This is the growth period now. It doesn't take long. It only takes about 5 minutes. So I'm just going to put that off to the side. In a warm, it's, you know, normally recipes say in a warm place. So where is the warmest place in your kitchen? If you're in the winter right now, maybe you want to put it in like a hot water cupboard or something like that, which is where we used to always proof our bread and raise our yeast, was in the hot water cupboard, but that's up to you. So we're going to get on to the dry ingredients now. So I am going to be putting everything straight into my mixing bowl. Now I am using, as you can see, come this way, I'm using can you see? A KitchenAid, there it is. I'm using KitchenAid. If you do not have access to a stand mixer with, where is it? With a whisk attachment, you don't need a baker's hook for this. You just need or a bread hook. You just need a whisk attachment. If you don't have access to this, you can do this recipe by hand, but you will need to use like really big. These guys here need to be really big and stir really hard. In fact, this may be one of those jobs you want to share within the family to make sure that you are actually getting a really, really good stir in here. So back with our bowl onto our scales. Just going to put it into grams. 1 second, guys, while I tear it off. Make sure it's in grams. There we go. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add the flour. Now the type of flour that I'm using today is obviously a gluten-free flour mix that you can buy from the supermarket. One of the great things about being gluten-free right now is that people are not panic buying gluten-free flour. We are just like, yay, gluten-free. So I've not had any troubles buying anything healthy in the supermarkets or in the markets. Everything's been good. The only thing I've struggled with is actually buying yeast. So if you see yeast, buy it and put it in your freezer. Remember, it lasts for 6 months. So I'm going to be adding 300 grams, which is about 10.5 ounces of gluten-free flour. Doesn't matter what brand you use. Just use a good quality gluten-free flour mix. 300 grams. 10.5 ounces goes into our bowl. Now, 300. Perfect. We are going to need that later on, so I'm just going to leave it off to the side. As well as the flour, the next thing I'm going to be adding, the gluten-free flour, the next thing I'm going to be adding is something called xanthan gum. Please attempt to read that backwards. It's spelled Z-A-N-T-H-A-N, xanthan gum. You will find it in pretty much any health food aisle of your supermarket. It is essential for gluten-free baking. Yes, I've got a question, Mahi.
Where did you get your cool wooden looking scales?
So my wooden scales, my bamboo scales, actually bought from Kmart. I think it was like $10. How great are they, right? Electronic scales, Kmart, fantastic. I've had them for a couple of years, so they last really, really well. So xanthan gum, remember this one here again, this one here. This is used as a thickener or a binder in gluten-free baking, and it is essential. So if you're wondering if you need it or not, yes you do. You will not be able to make a good loaf of bread without xanthan gum. So I'm going to be adding into our container here, our mixing bowl, 1 tablespoon of xanthan gum goes in. Now this packet here, which is, what is that, 100 grams, that will normally last me about like over a month of baking, and I do a lot of baking, as you guys know. A little goes a long way. Probably this is the most I will ever use in a baking in a recipe, is in this bread recipe. Normally I'm using like a teaspoon or a quarter of a teaspoon of xanthan gum. So if you're wondering whether it's worth buying and you want to bake, you need it. Go and find it. Like I said, no one's panic buying xanthan gum. Thank goodness. We can still cook. No one's panic buying it. So we've got that in there. The next thing I'm going to be thinking about doing is adding a little bit of flavour. And the flavour that we're going to be adding today is simply salt. This is going to give our bread flavour. Without salt, we are going to get a pretty boring loaf. So I'm adding into my mix here 2 teaspoons. And I'm using a Himalayan salt. You can use any type of mineral salt in this. Table salt, not so much. It's a little bit full on. I'll probably only go 1 teaspoon of normal like table salt. I'm not a fan of table salt for anyone who's followed my recipes, but Himalayan salt or a really good quality mineral salt has way better flavor, plus it has better benefits for your body as well. So that's all the dry ingredients that we need. Nothing else is required. So this now goes over to here, or if you don't have one of these, you will then be getting a wooden spoon. Come, I want you guys to see. There we go. Can you see now? Perfect. Alright, like I said, this only requires a whisk attachment. You don't have to have a dough hook for this at all. This now goes on, and just give it a brief little blend. Doesn't need much. Like literally that's it. All we're doing is just combining those dry ingredients, making sure the salt's gone throughout, making sure the xanthan gum is well distributed within that gluten-free flour, and then I'm going to start to come over and look back again at our little yeast mixture. So the best way to tell whether your yeast is active or whether you've left it for long enough, like I said, it needs about 5 to 10 minutes. What you are looking for is that little bit of froth or head on the top of this liquid here. Very much like if you've just poured a beer into a glass, or if you worked in a pub ever and you've just poured a pint of beer, you'll know that you're going to get some head. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that head on that I was going to say that beer, on that yeast. Yes, Mahi, we have another question.
Regina asked, do you use a handheld mixer?
Can you use a handheld blender? Yes, it all depends whether your handheld blender, like for this stage here, we're just mixing dry ingredients. Yes, you could use a handheld blender. But once you start to add liquid in here, it might get a little bit harder. So it depends on, I suppose, the quality and the strength of your handheld blender. But probably the best thing to do is just to try it. See what happens and let us know. Please let us know, Georgina. Also, I see we've had a couple people ask whether they can use a handheld blender as well. Yes, we've got one more question, another question there.
Tracy Walters asked, Bridget, do you use your yeast straight out of the freezer or measure it out and let it sit on the bench for a while?
Tracy, I use my yeast straight from the freezer because as soon as it gets into your warm liquid, it starts to wake up. So that beer starts to come alive. And I always like to think of yeast as like a hibernating beer. It's my wonderful analogy of when that sun starts to shine through to that cave and the bear goes, whoops, time to go eat some berries. So that's what, just add it straight. Don't even have to wait for it to warm up. In fact, you want to prevent your yeast, your jar of yeast, being at room temperature for as short a period of time as possible. So don't leave it on your bench, because as you leave it on your bench, it begins to wake up, and it wakes up and then it starts to die. So take your yeast out of the freezer, put it into your liquid mixer, a mix, put the yeast straight back into the freezer is my number one tip here to make sure your yeast lasts for a really long time. So I'm just gonna, I think we might get more of a head on that. I'm gonna leave that a little bit longer, but I'm happy because I know the yeast is alive because I am getting head on this. I'm getting froth, I'm getting beer looking, you know, stuff happening there. If I was not getting any beer looking head, no froth, I would then know, now I've waited here for 5 minutes and I've done everything else correctly, you then can be pretty assured that your yeast is dead and you need to buy some more, yeah? So that's why I always do it, whether I'm using dried yeast or instant yeast, I always do this just to make sure my yeast is actually alive, because it's one thing to just waste this amount of ingredients, but imagine I put it into the flour, I mix everything in, I put it into the oven, and instead of getting this beautiful rise out of my ingredients, I get a flat, you know, dense loaf. That'll be so much wastage. That's why I always do this step. I know it takes an extra 5 minutes, but it's worth it if you want to make sure you're not wasting your ingredients with the flour and stuff. So that's looking good. Let's go on to the other liquid ingredients. There's only a couple more things we're going to add. Now, those couple more things are, firstly, and by the way, everyone, we have this wonderful, amazing friend of ours, Tracy. She has been following and loving everything we've done for such a long time. Her name is Tracy Waters. If anyone is in New South Wales, she has a wonderful business. She sells eggs. She has a chicken farm. We all need to support each other. And I wish these were Tracy's eggs. They are not. I haven't seen Tracy for a little bit now. But Tracy has an egg farm in New South Wales. And Tracy, please feel free to leave any type of link or anything to your business. I know you've just started a business page. Leave it. We want to support you. If you, in fact, if any one of you are watching here and you have a food business and you would like to share your food business with us, please feel free to share your food business and a link to your business in the comments here. I would like to know who you are, by the way, and what you do as well. So let us all know, and we can all support each other through this crazy time. All right, I just added 2 eggs, by the way. Told you, the 2 eggs. Now the reason why I'm adding eggs, this is really important to bread making as well. What eggs do is they have a very similar effect on our bread as what the yeast does, would you believe? They act as a leavening agent, which means they help to give our bread rise. They're not going to give just rise, like you couldn't just add lots of eggs and not add yeast, because you'll get flat loaf, but the eggs help. The eggs help to give our bread a bit of lift. But the other thing that the yolks do especially is they help to enrich the bread. They give it flavor, they give the texture of they give the crumb a very nice delicate texture as well. So our eggs are really important in our bread making because we want to have texture and a nice crumb, and we also want to have that beautiful rise, and we want the flavor of the yolks to enrich the bread as well. So I've got 2 yolks in there. The next thing I'm going to add is just a little bit of apple cider vinegar. Once again, this is not just going to help with flavor, this is also going to help to give our bread that rise. Now if I was to add too much vinegar, my bread would be flat. But adding just 1 teaspoon of this apple cider vinegar is going to help to give us a little bit of rise. So it's a real doubt, like I said, baking's a science. Too much vinegar, you get flat bread. Too little vinegar, and then maybe it won't rise as much and you won't get as much of a good flavor. So 1 teaspoon, I'm using apple cider vinegar in there as well, of course. And the very last ingredient we're going to be adding into this is I'm going to be adding in 2 tablespoons of olive oil. You could also use avocado oil in here, or you could use coconut oil, completely up to you. Now the reason why we're using oil in here, once again, just like the apple cider vinegar, too much oil and the bread will be flat and you won't get the rise. It will inhibit the rise. But just the right amount of olive oil, which is 2 tablespoons, means that we're going to get great flavor to our bread, and it's going to help with that crumb as well, which is really important. So I've got those in there. I'm just going to give them a bit of a stir just to mix them through. You just want to make sure that the yolks are well blended. You don't have to go crazy with a whisk. Just make sure they're well blended. I'm going to go back to my yeast mixture so we can have a little bit of a look what's happening there. See, just leaving it for that couple more minutes, I've got just that bit more of head You know, like a really well poured pint of beer is what you're looking for here. So now that that's done, happy with all that sort of business, turn you onto the side so you can see. All we need to do now, I'm going to turn this on. I always like to add liquid when the machine is just on, not on full blast, otherwise you're going to get things going everywhere. Just on gently. I'm going to add in our yeast first. There's a lot of yeast in there, look at that. You don't want to waste that, really important. So, get out your plastic spatula and do not waste that yeast. That yeast is what's going to give our bread the rise that we require. As well as that, I'm also going to put in our our egg mixture. It's going to go in there as well. Turn this up. Love that sound. It's like a splatter. Love that. You can see why having one of these machines is really cool, because I'm not doing that by hand. If you had to go full bore to get everything mixed through, which is what I'm trying to look for here, is getting I'll show you what it looks like now. It kind of looks like curds. That's not ideal. I need it to look like a smooth dough. And so the reason why I turned it up just like that is because I want that dough to look quite smooth. And the best way to achieve that is by vigorous stirring or whisking. This is when I say you may need to phone a friend to give you a hand here, just in case your whisking arm might get a little bit tired. You can definitely phone a friend, but we're looking for a very smooth dough. So in the recipe that you got, come up here, it's going to be there for a while. In the recipe that Mahe has shared with you guys just recently, it says to mix for about 3 to 4 minutes. Now that is a mix for 3 to 4 minutes if you have one of these. If you don't have one of these and you're doing it by hand, you might want to mix for a little bit longer, and I'm talking maybe 5 to 6 minutes of mixing. That's when you might want to get some help with you to mix it through, because obviously this mixing is a lot more efficient than my mixing. But if you don't have a machine, it's absolutely fine. You're still going to get an amazing result. It just requires you to put in a little bit more effort. And for those who've asked whether you can use a handheld mixer, you might just want to go for a little bit longer, because it's not quite as efficient as the good old professional KitchenAid here, which it's an absolute workhorse, is why I love it. And even after this bit of time, what I'm noticing is we're getting a very lovely smooth dough, which is what you want. It's gone from looking like curds to looking smooth. Yes, Mahe, you've got another question? So I've had a question. Someone doesn't have gluten-free flour, so what can they use? This is a gluten-free baking class, so I would suggest you try and get gluten-free flour. I don't cook with gluten and haven't cooked with gluten for many years because of the negative effects it has on our body, the negative effects it has on our health as well. So if you are here and watching this and you regularly eat gluten products, I'm talking about white flour, cakes made with it, muffins, bagels and all that sort of stuff, for any of us who have taken and removed gluten from our lives, you know how positive it is towards health. And if you're here watching this and you have some health goals, and those health goals may be weight loss, number one. Those health goals may be more energy. Those health goals may be that you're in a place where you just want to improve your sleep patterns and your mood swings, then gluten's a really good thing to remove. If you're in isolation, which is Michelle's saying, then this is probably just a recipe that you don't have right now. You just need to wait till you're no longer in isolation and you can actually get out to the stores, or you order it online, which is what I've been doing, as I've been ordering food online. I have been in isolation. How long have we been in isolation? It's nearly come up to 21 days The only time I've left the house is to shop twice in 21 days. And I also left the house to go to the hospital to be with our son. Those are the only times. So I've been ordering everything online to have delivered to our house. So there's an opportunity there. But if you are in isolation and you can't order online and you can't get hold of gluten-free flour, I would honestly recommend that you just wait till you can. I'm staunch, man. When it comes to gluten products, I'm like, I know the difference it's made in my body. There is no old, like, you could try making this with almond flour. Chances are it's not going to work as well. You could do a half-half almond, but you're still going to need a little bit of that gluten-free flour to give it structure. All right, so it's been a couple of minutes of mixing, which is a great question. Took up some time. Let's see what's happening in here. In fact, it is a good opportunity to just have a bit of a chat with whoever's in your house, because this does take a bit of time. And what you're looking for, let me show you when I pull this up. So we have a very, very wet dough right now. It's not so wet that it just drips off the whisk, but it is so wet that when I do that, it completely sticks to my finger. There is no opportunity for that to come off. Now that is perfectly okay if your dough now looks like this, because what you now need to do is to bring it together. Now the reason why I don't have exact ingredients or measurements for the amount of flour you're going to add now, gluten-free flour, is because every gluten-free flour, depending on like the brand you buy, they all have different absorbency levels. So some of them require more water to bring it together to a dough or liquid. Others require less because they're a drier or a more absorbent flour. Hence why this now requires you to be a little bit observant. And if you've ever had issues with this recipe, it can potentially, this is like a watch point, it can potentially be at this point now, because this does require you to be observant and to know what's going on within your mixing bowl. So I'll bring you down here even though there's not a lot to see, but you can get to see what I'm doing. So remember, we now currently have very, very sticky dough. It's almost like a really thick pancake batter or a crumpet batter. It's really, really thick. There is no way that you could roll that out and make that into a bread right now. It would be really difficult. So what we need to start to think of doing is adding some flour to bring it together. The amount of flour you use, remember, will depend on the brand of flour that you're using, the gluten-free flour. Some people make their own, so that's why I say it all depends. Every flour is different. Every absorbency of flour is different. So I'm going to put this on just on low, and I'm just going to add in, I'm probably adding in around about a cup at a time, I'm adding in about a quarter of a cup at a time, and I'm keeping an eye on it. And what I'm looking for, and I'll show you the different stages as we go, what I'm looking for is the dough to start to be drier. So already, as you can see, I'm able to just do that. I wasn't able to transfer it before. And even putting my finger in, I now have a bit of a lump. That was only with a quarter of a cup added. I'm going to add another quarter of a cup because it's still definitely way too wet. Another quarter of a cup goes in. Medium speed now. I'm noticing in the bowl that the dough, I'm going to show you, is starting to lump together, as you can see. So I'm beginning to create a ball of dough, which is another great sign that we are getting there. Like I said, you don't want to rush this. This is where you want to just be patient with it. Don't rush it. Like I just said, don't rush it. Another quarter of a cup goes in. And we're really beginning to bring that dough together, which is nice. All right. I'm going to do the rest by hand now so you guys can see what's going on. So it's good. Thank you. You've been a great working friend today. Thanks for all your hard work. But we're going to do this by hand now because I want you guys to see exactly what's happening. So don't need my chopping board anymore. You can see what's happening in here is that I'm able to do this. And pretty much the entire ball of dough has got into my hands, which is into my whisk, which is perfect because I want to be able to touch it with my hands. So I'm going to be applying a little bit of my gluten-free flour to a clean board or a bench, whatever it is you're using, just a little bit. And then using my lovely clean hands, And I'm also using my, my dough scraper, which is just going to help for me to take it off the whisk. So you don't have to, this is probably my favorite part of bread making. It's the satisfying part, and you don't have to rush it. In fact, take your time, enjoy it. We do have time. We can actually do this sort of stuff now. If you're doing this with kids, this is also a great, really awesome time to get the kids involved as well, because kids all over the world love dealing with dough. It's like Play-Doh, right? It's Play-Doh, but you get to eat it afterwards. All right, don't eat it anymore. That can go in the sink. So I've got about that much left in my bowl, which I'm going to, remember the ingredients I've given you makes one crusty loaf, or if you wanted to, you could also make little mini bread rolls as well with it, and I think it makes about 8 to 10 mini rolls, or dinner rolls. Okay, so that's all scraped out, perfect. There. And what I'm left with is this kind of a crazy, sticky mess on my bench, which is not ideal. I want it to be at a point where it no longer sticks to my bench and it no longer sticks to my fingers. But the best way to tell what's happening is to move to your bench. So I've got another pretty decent amount of flour, and then what I'm going to do is begin to roll it on my bench. So what we started with was like thick pancake dough, and just with that amount of rolling, I now actually have the ability to pick this up. I can put my finger into it and my finger comes out fairly good. It doesn't just stick, so I know that my dough is at a point where it's got enough flour. Got way too much on my bench. Way too much. I'm going to save that to sprinkle it over before it goes into the oven to bake. But now you have that wonderful ability just to go through. Well, it's still a little bit sticky. There we go, a bit of flour, a little bit sticky. And when you're kneading your dough, what you want to be thinking about doing is using this part of your palm here. So I'm pulling it back with my fingers, and then I'm pushing it forward with that part there. So it's this wonderful movement that we get here. You're supposed to do it with one hand tied behind your back. You know why? Like seriously, this is what I was taught at chef's school when I was being taught how to bake, is that they always taught us to do everything with one hand, because then you've always got a clean hand to answer the phone. Like seriously, that's why we were taught, because when the phone goes in the kitchen, and if the phone goes in the kitchen and you're the apprentice, it's usually the executive chef or the head chef, you better answer that phone, and you better answer it quick. So I was always taught to do everything literally with one hand tied behind my back, so that I always had a clean hand. I know, terrible, right? We have a question. Yes, Mahi?
Ruth has asked, can I use a dough hook and mix it?
Yes, you can use a dough hook. If you do have a dough hook and you want to use that, you absolutely can and should. But you don't have to. I know for a lot of people they do have the whisk attachment, they don't have the dough hook. If you have a dough hook, please feel free to use it. So I've now achieved what I was looking for, which is a lovely firm dough. Pick it up. Now this is going to be a little bit rude, so if you've got kids listening, but it's the perfect way to describe how this feels. If you've got kids listening, maybe just hold their ears for a second. It should feel like a woman's boob. Like literally, when you do that, it should, like natural, not artificial ones, not fake ones. It should literally feel like a woman. If it's your own boobs, you know exactly how it feels. If you have to feel someone else's boobs to know what this feels like, then we need to find a new analogy, because you might get arrested. I don't think it's legal. But it should literally feel like a natural bosom. This is what it feels like. It's soft, it's kind of pliable, but at the same time, you know, it's good and heavy. There's a bit of density in there. So I've now created it into a ball, which is really important, because the next stage, and this is a really cool step that I learned for this particular recipe, because how we're going to bake it is different to how you might normally bake bread rolls, because we want this crusty exterior, remember, which is a technique to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take myself up some non-stick baking paper, a nice big piece, non-stick baking paper. So literally like 2.5 A4 sizes of baking paper. That's going to go down on my bench. And I'm going to take up my beautiful bosom of bread, just like that. My lovely round loaf. And in order for it to now go to the next stage, I'm going to move this off to the side. And I'm going to invert just a metal bowl or a bowl over the top of it in the warm place in my kitchen. My entire kitchen is warm, by the way, today. It is really, really warm. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to leave that to proof or double in size until the entire dough is doubled in size. Now that may take, depending on the warmth in your kitchen. And remember, yeast needs that lovely lukewarm temperature or room temperature around about 36 degrees in order for you to get a really good rise out of it. It may take a bit of time. It may take half an hour, depending on the heat in your kitchen. It may take 45 minutes. It may take an hour and a half at this point for it to double in size, and that's what you're looking for. So not so much a time frame, more about what's happening under the bowl. So I'm going to leave that there, because that's all you need to do with it at this point in time. Nothing more that you need to do for it, but leave that to double in size. This is a good opportunity to clean your bench, because I got a dirty bench. This is when these come in really handy, because look, you can do this. This is so good. This is why everyone in the industry uses these type of things, and they are so incredible, not just for portioning bread, but for also cleaning down your bench. Aren't they great? So, give my bench a bit of a clean down. I'm not going to throw those away because I can use that when the bread goes into the oven. And then what you need to do is you need to, at this point in time, now that our bread's doubling in size and proofing, you need to turn your oven on. And that may seem like a really long time to preheat your oven, but you're going to be turning your oven on now, and you're going to be setting your oven at 250 degrees, sorry, I'm wrong. No, I'm not. 250 degrees Celsius, which is 480 degrees Fahrenheit. That's really, really hot to bake bread. But remember, we want a crusty bread roll. So we want the outside to be crusty and we want the inside to be tender. The way that we're going to achieve that is putting it into a really, really, really hot oven. But there's another thing we're going to do to achieve that as well. It's not only are we putting it into a really, really hot oven to bake, we're also going to be using one of these. You guys know what this is? This is a cast iron pot. Now the reason why I'm holding it like this has actually been in the oven. So when you turn your oven on to preheat it, you're going to take a cast iron pot with a lid, and then that is going to go into the oven to preheat along with the oven. Really important step to achieving that wonderful crust on the outside of the bread. So let's just kind of, time travel a little bit, and let's imagine that our bread has now doubled in size, so it's proofed. It is at a point now that it needs to be baked. Now, if you proof your bread too long, so instead of doubling in size, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, what you may find is that when you put it into the oven, is that it will rise and then it will deflate as well, so you won't get a solid loaf. If that happens to you, or it's happened to you in the past, it could be because you overproofed your bread. So what you're looking for, and like I said, if there's so many factors that it's going to determine how long it proofs for. Heat in the kitchen is one of them. How active your yeast is, how well you've mixed the bread, whether you've used an electric mixer or you've done it by hand. All these things are going to contribute to how long your bread's going to take to double in size. So it's going to require you to be very active and be very, I suppose, really a part of the process. So keep an eye on it, pretty much. It's that simple. Just keep an eye on it. Just go and check it every 10 minutes until you get more of an idea of what time frame your bread needs in order for it to double in size. So with my bread, I know it usually takes, in my kitchen sort of sits at an ambient temperature. It's pretty hot most of the time because we're based in Sydney. It doesn't get really, 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 really cold here. So my bread normally takes between 50 to an hour to double in size, which is absolutely fine. So keep an eye on it. Once your bread is at that point that you know that it's doubled in size and you're happy with it, you are then going to remove the lid of the bowl, take it, don't need that anymore, and then just taking a very sharp knife, or it can be just a little paring knife, and just make a couple of incisions into the bread. You only want to go about that deep into the bread. That's going to help it to bake as well. So once you have done that, you have proofed it double in size. You have sliced it on top just to allow the steam to escape as it's baking. You can take those crumbs, remember, from the bench and sprinkle them over the top of the bread. We don't want to waste anything. It's just going to give it that little flour tendency, or that flour aspect once it comes out of the oven. Then what you're going to do, and I'll show you from the one even though it's not proofed, what you want to do is you want to pick up, remember this is the bread that we've proofed in half. Imagine I've put some slices onto it. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up the entire piece of baking paper. This is why this is so cool to use. And I'm going to take my cast iron pot out of the oven. Remember, this is hot. This is ridiculously hot. It has now been in the oven heating up at 250 degrees Celsius for 1 hour. This is hot. Please be careful. Be so careful. Make sure you sit it on a wooden board on your bench. Take off the lid. Take off the lid and then take your ball of dough, your bread, and using the baking paper, drop the whole thing in with the baking paper and then close the lid. That's all you've got to do. And then that goes into the oven and you need to bake that between 35 to 45 minutes until it's done. So here's one that I prepared earlier. So I took my baking paper ball just like that and I've dropped it into my cast iron pot, and this is my finished product. So this is what I've left. It's been out of the oven now for about half an hour, so I can pick it up by my hand. So this is my finished bread product. What do you reckon? Doesn't sound hard. Is it cooked under the bottom? Always give it a bit of a tap. Tapping it on the bottom and it's hollow will tell you that it's cooked through. So there is my crusty bread, gluten-free bread roll. There's not many recipes that I have seen available where you can actually get a loaf of bread that looks like that and it's crusty like that and hollow like that, that is gluten-free. This is probably one of the only ones that I've ever seen, and it's, as you guys have seen, it's not hard to make when you know the technique. And now this, it's still warm. Mahay's excited. This means lunch. It is still warm, but now we have the ability to have freshly baked bread. The house smells amazing, by the way. And this was in the oven. This took 40 minutes to bake, just like this. And then I just took it out of the oven and I let it cool in here just while I was chatting with you guys while we made the rest of this. This came out not even 5 minutes before we went live today. And we now have this amazing loaf of bread for lunch. So that is as simple as it gets. I'm just going to put the lid back on this because I don't want to waste that. Put the lid back on there. That is as simple as it gets. Now remember, if you want the recipe to that, Mahay, can you throw up that link? Oh, he's just thrown up that link. There is a link for that. But as well as that, just want to remind you guys that if you like gluten-free baking, and I like gluten-free baking because I can eat everything and not be unhealthy and not have gluten wheat belly and all that sort of stuff, which is amazing. I have a ebook, if you don't have it already as part of your collection of Bridget's Healthy Kitchen recipes. I have an ebook available. Bridget's Healthy Breads and Pastries has 32 bread recipes. 32. I've got them here if you want to know just a few things that's on here. There's my banana berry bread for a start. It's an absolute winner. I know a few of you have been making that because bananas are in abundance at the moment. It has my my English muffins, my vegan bread made from nuts and seeds, hot dog rolls, coconut chapati, almond bread, hot cross buns, vegan scones are on there as well. Gluten-free, dairy-free, vegan scones are on there. There is my vegan pizza dough, cauliflower wraps, sweet almond crust pie pastry, which is an absolute winner. Like I'm looking at all these going, I probably need to make these. I've also got vegan crumpets, mini donuts, actually 2 types of donuts on here. I've got vegan cinnamon donuts and I've got mini donuts, little mini ones that you make in a little donut maker. There's rough puff pastry, short crust pastry, sweet or savory, different, oh, my yeast-free seaweed bread. If anyone's had that, oh my God, it's so amazing. But also as well as that, I shared a beer bread recipe I think last week. which if you don't have yeast, because you can't find it, I also have the most amazing, and a lot of these recipes on here are actually yeast free as well, if you can't find yeast. Of course, they're all gluten free, dairy free, sugar free, all that sort of stuff. But I have an amazing beer recipe. I call it the Rona, because it's made with Corona beer. There's also that one there as well. Mahe's going to throw up the link to that ebook if you'd like to get that ebook. It's amazing. I want to cook everything on here. I'm like, I forgot I made that. That was amazing. All my seaweed soda bread. It's my version of an Irish soda bread, but we use seaweed and it's so delicious. So there you go, guys. Oh, there's also vegan friendly garlic naan. Garlic naan bread for your curries. Oh, it's just so good. So that's how you make. And that was just kind of like a really cool gluten-free masterclass on gluten-free bread baking, which is so exciting. Can't wait to get into this. Very, very excited to be home. Very excited to be with you guys here as well. Back in our quarantine kitchen. We're going to have more episodes of Bridget's Quarantine Kitchen coming up in the next couple of days. Keep an eye out. Please let us know what you want to learn, and we will just keep on teaching what you guys want to learn. It has been wonderful. It has been exciting to be with you. I hope you're all well. Please stay safe. Please remember, keep calm and keep cooking. That's what we're going to do. That's how we're going to help to get through all of this. All right, guys, it has been an absolute blast. I will look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Quarantine Kitchen. Take care.